Journalism, the oxygen of democracy, is presented by the Voice of America Museum. Funding for the series is provided by Keo Financial Advisors, personalized guidance for financial independence, and by Sibylle, Shillito & Dyer, a legal professional association. This program was recorded at the museum on February 19, 2026. Tim Love discusses his new book, The Medium is the Mirror, The Reformation of Truth, Reshaping Our Relationships, Politics, and Sacred Beliefs.
It's easy to put people in boxes. There's us, and there's them. The high earners, and those just getting by. Those we trust, and those we try to avoid. There's the new Danes, and those who've always been here. The people from the countryside, and those who've never seen a cow. The religious, and the self-confident. There are those we share something with, and those we don't share anything with.
Velkommen. Jeg kommer til at stille jer nogle spørgsmål i dag. Nogle af dem kan godt være lidt personlige, men jeg håber, I vil svare ærligt på dem. Hvem herinde i rummet var klassens klovn? Hvem er bonusforældre?
And then suddenly, there's us. We who believe in life after death. We who've seen UFOs. And all of us who love to dance. We who've been bullied. And we who've bullied others. And then there's us, the lucky ones who've had sex this past week. We who are broken-hearted. We who are madly in love. We who feel lonely. We who are bisexual, and we who acknowledge the courage of others. We who have found the meaning of life, and we who have saved lives. And then there's all of us who just love Denmark. So maybe there's more that brings us together than we think. TV2 Denmark. All that we share.
The title of the presentation is about my new book. It's called The Medium is the Mirror. And there's some copies in the back that you can buy, and I'll sign them. The money will go to the museum, not me. And this is kind of a sequel to Discovering Truth that I talked about the last time I was here. And it's just a topic that's gotten more and more relevant every day. And there's been times that I said, gee, I gotta put this down and stop thinking about it. But every day there's something new in the news, or something new about the media, or something new about the internet that has made me want to keep pushing. So I'm gonna talk about what's going on with media. And some people say, well, what does an ad guy know about any of this? And the point of this is going to be that self-government requires cognitive self-government. That means it requires our ability ourselves to self-govern our thinking. and our current information medium, which is the whole environment of media, weakens both our self-government and our ability to have cognitive self-government. And that's kind of the theme of this presentation, and I hope to put together a case here tonight that will help you and help understand some real dangers that our country is facing because of our information system and who controls it, and how it affects us unwittingly, because we've shifted from verbal face-to-face communication, particularly in our younger people, but even in the baby boomers, older generation, you're using text and typing more than you've ever used it. And the point is that when you text and type, you use different parts of your brain than you do when you communicate face-to-face. And when you communicate in typing and texting, your ideas become intractable. That's why you were told to write things down. That's why you put objectives. That's why we had, strategies for Procter & Gamble, and why people wanted to see on your resume what your goals were. But when you write things down, they calcify because you're using parts of your brain that you don't use when you're communicating face-to-face. And that's kind of a thread that I'm going to take you through tonight and show you some things that I've discovered that I think will be interesting, and I wish I could see better than I did. But part of that is that there's three pillars to this, and the first thing is that there's a democratic crisis going on. You've heard a lot about this, read about it, about how seriously polarized we are in our beliefs. It's alarming how polarized our population is, and it's not just America, it exists in other countries too. But in particular here, because we matured as an internet community faster and more completely than the rest of the world. And so the effect has been more pronounced here than in other places, but it's equally concerning in a lot of different countries and cultures. And you've heard a lot about trust is diminishing. People don't know if they can believe any information they get. They don't know what's true and what isn't true. And it's a very difficult thing when you're faced with confusion. Human beings don't like confusion. It makes us uncomfortable. So we try and solve that confusion by either hunkering down and believing at least in one thing and holding on to it forever because we're afraid to rethink what we believe. And rethinking what we believe is another word for it, learning. We shouldn't be afraid to rethink our beliefs. This can stand up to our rigor of our thinking, and some things get stronger as we have other information and we examine them. And there's a cognitive threat, and that's because it depends on having the cognitive capacity to think and decide and rethink and evaluate information. And that cognitive process is being changed by the way we're accessing information over the internet and how we're communicating and typing and texting versus sitting down and talking to each other, where you can read somebody's face and you can find out, well, they don't understand what I'm saying, so I'll try it a different way, or I don't understand what you're saying. But when you're communicating and typing and texting, there's this big gap, and communications happen sequentially, not together. And that's a problem. It's a problem, more of a problem than any of us imagined. So the four horsemen of the apocalypse has now got a new member, and that member is called misinformation, and it's rampant, and I'm going to tell you why. And it's alarming how open we've left our information systems in this country. You'll understand why when I go through some of the history. So trust in information, just to hit on that, recent study came out last week that 57% of Americans express low confidence in media, low confidence in news, low confidence in the information they're getting. 40% say they're not too much confidence, and 17% says they have no confidence at all. And there's all kinds of data that shows, you know, whether you're Republican or Christian or Jewish or whatever, but this to me is the bigger issue. It's the general malaise that people have. It's always had a low, you know, kind of bar for trust. And it's something that I encountered during my 50-year career, because people think that advertising makes you do things that you don't want. And I always try to refute that, because I worked with Procter & Gamble and other clients that you had to tell the truth, you had to find the truth. Even if the brand manager wanted you to say something that wasn't true, you knew that you had to tell the truth to the consumer, because that's how you build a relationship of trust. That's how you build a sustainable relationship. So truth is always very important, and I always refuted people saying, "Oh, you guys, you make us buy things you don't need." And about a year ago, I decided to stop doing that. I decided to start admitting that, yes, advertising can make us do things that we don't want to do. And that's happening more and more because of the information systems we're using. And it isn't advertising. It used to be called journalism and news and social media and other things. But I find it interesting that advertising has progressed to being about equal with the other things that have diminished more significantly: media, federal government, big business. And this is a problem when we don't trust things, because it affects our ability to cognitively manage our own lives and others. The thing I want you to know is that the internet medium rules all of media now. It used to be that you had newspapers with journalists that would live in Dubai or live in Israel or whatever. Well, a lot of that has gone away because they're sourcing their information not through journalists but through the internet, which compounds the issue about the authenticity and truth of the information they're getting. But some other things have happened that most Americans aren't aware of, and I hope to make you aware of those things, because once you understand them, you can be hopeful that we can get this fixed. And one thing that I learned about advertising, and as I went around the world and I saw different cultures and helped my clients launch brands in different places, was I saw what an advantage America had in terms of its culture of advertising. We made media more accessible and more deeply penetrating into our culture because of advertising, because the media was free. Most other countries, it's government owned, even if it's a democracy, or so-called democracy. But in many areas of the world, the media is controlled by the government. And so a real advantage for America, and I've preached this, is that it's an engine for our economy, but it has to be perpetuated as commercial speech. It isn't free speech, it's commercial speech, because it's speech designed to sell products. It's media designed to house advertising. And I'll talk more about that. You know, as I was coming out here to Voice of America, I thought I'd always think about Edward R. Murrow, and this audience would be a lot more aware of Edward R. Murrow than the audience I spoke to today at 1 o'clock at Miami University. One of the students, I was trying to figure out how old they were, and I should have done a better job. But I was talking about the Olympics in China in 2008, and what a big deal that was, and you all remember that. They were going to come out to the world economy, and boy, did they put on a show. And I'll tell you something about that in a little bit. But after the presentation, this young lady came up to me and said, "Well, I didn't really know much about that. I was born in 2004. Oh, and but Edward R. Murrow was a hero for a lot of people that went into communications and journalism and television and radio and everything, because of his principles and because he was such a forerunner. During World War II, he was, you know, doing radio broadcasts from London when it was being bombed. And he came back in the United States with CBS, and he was in some of the early television series. Some of you might remember his interview series where he'd go visit somebody in their house, and I always remember that he interviewed Salvador Dali, and it left a huge impact on me because I wanted to be an artist. And Salvador Dali had this big mustache, but he also walked into the interview with Edward R. Murrow, and he had one of those dog things that looks like a leash that's hard, but there's no dog on it. I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. I thought, what a creative guy he is. So a lot of that came through Edward R. Murrow and his way of interviewing. A lot of people don't know that, they know that he had some issues with broadcast media during the McCarthy era, the concerns about the Red Scare and things like that, and he had some run-ins with McCarthy. And but after that, he went to run USAID, and he was the first executive for the Voice of America in America. Now, a lot of people don't know that Voice of America got started here in Cincinnati. I didn't. I went to Miami University. I didn't know this was here. I'm telling everybody, get down there, go see this. And by the way, stop and see the subway memorial that's coming in. It's going to be magnificent. But what Cincinnati has is it had a guy named Crosley, and most of you remember Crosley Field. But time has passed. You didn't realize that he made most of the radios in America in the 30s. And he also had a car company called Crosley. And he had a whole bunch of things. He was a real entrepreneur and interesting guy. Well, he built this tower here when the radio days started, and it was the biggest tower in North America. And that led to the idea of doing Voice of America by shortwave radio transfers to Germany, because we were concerned that the German people were not getting any news about the outside world. As you know, in both Italy, Japan, and in Germany, prior to the World War II in the 30s, their media was taken over by Mussolini, Hitler, and the military complex in Japan. So all the information was controlled, and the ability to control public opinion was entirely co-opted by these regimes. So we started Voice of America and to help people hear truth, and as we saw it. And it was really a noble thing. The other thing that happened around the same time was we started the War Advertising Council, which became the Advertising Council. And the War Advertising Council was started because we were concerned that we needed some way to get the American people to think together about things like loose lips sink ships, Rosie the Riveter, consuming milk and rubber and things for the war effort. And the War Advertising Council was started by advertising people. A guy named James Webb Young started it, and after the war, after everything was done, they said, well, we don't need this anymore. And he said, hold on, we have a lot we can do. One of the first things they did was Smokey the Bear. And so you know the rest of this, you all grew up with it, but it's been a wonderful thing. And Voice of America has been an essential equity of our country, and it scares me that it's being diminished, and that there's a generation of people that don't know what it's for, and they believe that, well, we don't need this anymore. Why do we need it? They don't understand why we needed it in the first place. So I wondered what Edward R. Murrow would say about today. And I don't have Edward R. Murrow, but I have Edward R. Murrow's words. And let's see what he would say.
We must not confuse dissent with disloyalty. We must remember always that accusation is not proof, and that conviction depends upon evidence and due process of law. We will not walk in fear one of another. We will not be driven by fear into an age of unreason if we dig deep in our history and our doctrine and remember that we are not descended from fearful men. Not from men who fear to write, to speak, to associate, or to defend the causes that are for the moment unpopular. We proclaim ourselves as indeed we are the defenders of freedom wherever it continues to exist in the world. But we cannot defend freedom abroad by deserting it at home. The actions of the junior senator from Wisconsin have caused alarm and dismay amongst our allies abroad and given considerable comfort to our enemies. And whose fault is that? Not really his. He didn't create this situation of fear. He merely exploited it, and rather successfully. Cassius was right. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves. Good night, and good luck.
How relevant is that? So, I like to tell people, what does an advertising guy know about this stuff? And I don't think I'm an ordinary advertising guy. I was raised west of Cleveland in the suburb. My dad was a used television repairman after World War II. We lived in one of the post-World War II bungalow houses like you see there. And in our front yard, my dad had this sign my whole life because he worked on televisions and radios, and we had them running in every room of our little house. So I became a child of the media without even knowing. I mean, we were first to get an antenna on top of our house, the first to get remote control to change channels, the first to get color TV, and it was a very unique household because I think the house, my brother told me the house was 1,300 square feet. There were 5 of us in one bathroom, and you know, we were lucky. But I grew up feeling an appreciation for the effect that media has, and a real interest in it. And I saw things early on, and my mother was from Mobile, Alabama. She was a Southern Baptist, and she grew up in an environment that had a point of view about race. And I remember sitting watching the Edmund Pettus Bridge Sunday Massacre on television and seeing the fire hoses and the German shepherds and everything. And I don't know how old I was. I must have been maybe 6 or 7. But I was watching with my mom, and I said, "Mom, this isn't right. Why are they doing that?" And she admitted that she was seeing something she hadn't seen before. So this whole idea of seeing things and information and changing is a continuation. It's not something new just with the internet. And the reason why I showed the other one is that I got chased all over the world by Procter & Gamble, and I looked at cultures and different people through a bunch of different frames of reference, mostly everyday household products that touch people's lives and help to improve them. But advertising also gave me a unique view of the art and science of persuasion, because that's what advertising is about. It's to advocate positions or to persuade people in certain points of view. And there it is, art and science. And I always felt that it was more art than science. But in the internet world, it's become more science. And I'll explain why. In the field of advertising, we used a very common construction, a strategic tool that we used, a discipline called belief dynamics. And belief dynamics is just a simple understanding that our perceptions lead to our beliefs, and our beliefs dictate our behavior. So if you can do research on any point of that continuum, if you want to change somebody's behavior, you got to find out what their perceptions are and what their beliefs are. If you observe somebody's behavior and you wonder why they're doing that, you can do research to find out what their perceptions and beliefs are that's causing that behavior. And it's just a simple strategic tool, but it's a really good way to study people and to ask questions. For example, when I was in Japan, I gave a talk called Think Like the Sun. And after I gave the talk at the Canadian Embassy, a Japanese guy who had invited to the presentation sent me an email the next day, and he said, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the presentation. Ten-san, very gracious, and, thank you. He said, but I must say that your metaphor bothered me, and I wondered if you could think of another metaphor than the sun, maybe like water. And I said, wow, he was really troubled by something, wasn't he? And actually, I had looked at something with water. There was a book called The Path of Least Resistance that Al Harris asked me to read. And it's about how letting ideas find their own way, like water. I didn't like the metaphor. I like to think like the sun because it led me to the frame of reference that I had in art school at Miami, which is you have to stand back from the painting every once in a while and take a look at it. You can't just stay there with the distance of your arm and judge what you're doing. You have to step away. And I felt that think global and act local had become obsolete because the borders that used to be there were no longer there. And certainly in Europe, you could travel around Europe without using a passport, except in Switzerland and in the UK. That was revolutionary. But that took away the borders, and where it used to take Procter & Gamble a week to 10 days to ship product from Belgium to Frankfurt, a 4-hour drive, and all of a sudden they could do it in 4 hours with no passport control, no duties, just phew. So that was life-changing. And when I came into my office the next day and I asked my assistant, I said, what was he troubled by with this think like the sun? And Kyoko said, well, you know, we got kind of full of ourselves during World War II, and we're afraid that that could happen again, and we don't want that to happen, and there's always this element in our society that it's imperialism, and we're just, you know, it scares us that we did that and we could do that again. And I said, well, okay, I understand that. I said, but who decided that you were the land of the rising sun? Did somebody come up with that with like an idea for a bumper sticker or what? And she said, well, it's our name. I said, what do you mean it's your name? She said, Nippon. Nippon's the real name of Japan, and Nippon means Ni, the sun, at its origin. Nippon. And the kanji letters that describe that, I don't have here, but I used to have in my presentation, would show you, you say, oh, I see it, it's the sun at its origin. And I said, well, okay, but who decided that? And she said, it's always been that way. It's always been that way. She stormed out of my office. She was upset because she didn't have an answer for it. She wondered why I was testing her, but I really wanted to know. And so that 2 days later, my language instructor came in, and my language instruction classes weren't really language instructions, they were cultural understanding discussions. And I said, how did Japan get its name? And he said, well, actually, it didn't have a language until it came over in kanji letters from the Chinese mainland. And I said, oh, you mean somebody in China looked to the east and said to the Japanese, you guys come from where the sun comes up. And he said, yeah. And if you lived in Japan, you never saw anybody come from the other direction because the world was flat. And if you've ever been to Japan, you know how bright it is in the morning. You really do feel like this is where the sun comes up. So it was actually named by China. And I thought, well, I wonder what China called itself. Does anybody have any idea what China called itself?
The Middle Kingdom.
Yeah. Why?
Because they're in the middle of the world.
Well, I think, and I told this to the Chinese government, this is a fun meeting I had with them. They told me it was because their culture was more advanced than any other in the world, and it was. They had gunpowder and ceramics, and they had brass, and you know the history. They had printing before the printing press. And they were very proud of that. And I said, well, I think, you know, I know that that's true, but I think maybe you're the Middle Kingdom because in the middle of the day, the sun's shining on you. And they went. But I wondered, what would they have called the West? And the actual kanji letters for West says West direction. And it bothered me because it wasn't a place. And it took me 10 years. So I was finally standing in Chengdu, China on this gate overlooking the Silk Road, beginning of the Silk Road, and I was standing there looking down the road, and I was saying, okay, so I'm going down the Silk Road and I'm going west. What's the sun doing? Well, it keeps moving. I never get to the point where it ends because they never got that far. And so it's a direction. And I gave this talk at Yale, and a Pakistani kid came to see me in my office the next week, and he said, I really like your idea, and you should know that in Carthage, in the early Middle East days of Carthaginians, they called the people who came down the Silk Road Asu. And Asu means from the sun. And I went, oh, do you think Asia called itself Asia? No, this is probably some Portuguese guy that boxed Asu and came on a job, and that's how it got its name. And then I wondered, well, how did Europe get its name? And some people say, well, there was a Greek goddess named Europa. No. There's a word that was used in Carthage for west direction, and it's like Ir. And Ir became Europe. Europe didn't name itself. So anyhow, these are just some of the things and games that I've enjoyed playing and understanding people and understanding their belief dynamics. I talked about the truth conundrum in advertising and how essential it is to relationships. I think what we're experiencing is another Reformation. Now, most of you know about the Reformation. Some of the students today didn't, so I had to go into it a little bit more. But the Reformation is considered to have been precipitated by the invention of the Gutenberg printing press in Europe in 1537 or 1517. And what happened was, until the Gutenberg printing press, the meaning of the Bible was the sole authority of the Catholic Church. They were the only ones that could tell you what the meaning of the Bible was. They protected it with calligraphy and the use of Latin. And nobody else was allowed to tell you what the meaning of the Bible was, until a Catholic priest in Germany decided to put up some alternative ideas on a church wall. And all hell broke loose because they were different than what the Pope was saying. But it wasn't just the printing press that happened. There were some other coincidental technical advantages. It happened around the time that the rear rudder was invented for sailing vessels. So it made the vessels more navigable. It also coincided with the ability to put more masts and more sails on a boat, and build a bigger boat and have it go faster. So ideas, goods, foods, people of different races could travel more easily. And it also coincided with the development of the canal systems. And if you've been to Europe, you see the canals all over the place, but you hardly ever see anybody in them unless they're on some kind of a vacation from France or something. That was their internet. And if you lived in Antwerp and all of a sudden down the canal comes somebody that doesn't look like you, doesn't talk your language, doesn't think like you do, eats different food, it was scary. A lot like the internet. And what we're having now is a reformation over truth again. Who knows what truth is? The average person today is bombarded by 74 gigabytes per day of information. That could be the logo on your hat, the signage, it could be a name on a t-shirt, walking to a store, seeing the promotional stuff, the packaging, the branding. And I wondered what 74 gigabytes were, because I wanted to sound like I was really current with the students today, and they liked it. I did gigabytes. But I said, what is that? And if you go in and you Google 74 gigabytes, you'll find out that it's the equivalent of 16 full-length movies a day of information. One of my heroes of the advertising history and media is Marshall McLuhan, another guy that people today don't know about, but he wrote about the effects of media in the 60s. He's the guy that coined the term the global village. He in a book called War and Peace in the Global Village. He had another book called The Mechanical Bride. He was very provocative. He was an English professor from Canada. And, but one of my favorite things that he said was on the question of who discovered the water, we're pretty sure it wasn't the fish. And he used to start his presentations with that. He'd come into a room and go, on the issue of who discovered the water, we're pretty sure it wasn't the fish. And everybody go, but he had some other ones too. He said that content is the juicy piece of meat that's used by the burglar to distract your mind. And a lot of things that he said I felt were coming true because he was talking about the future when the television would coexist with the computer. Now, a fish doesn't really know it's in water until it's taken out, and you know what happens when it flips around and it dies. But it's very hard for us to see the environment that we're in, and this environment of the medium has changed a lot. And how did that happen? Well, I'm going to show you a 1-minute video demo that was done by Rogers Communication in Canada. And it's hard to see because it happened so quickly, but you're going to experience what happened from 1930 to 2024. Of our time, 60% of our information. Did you see it start to pick up around 95? At that point, we had 15% penetration of the internet of American adults. It was just getting started. The rest of the world was less than 1%. China didn't have it, Russia didn't have it, Iran didn't have it, India didn't have it. And our government said, we want to stay in front of this. We want to be the leaders in this. So they got together with the platform people, the prodigies and the CompuServes and so forth, and they said, what can we do? It's very much like what you're experiencing right now with AI. This vast unknown is going to happen, and we don't want to get in the way with too many government regulations, so you guys tell us what we should do. What they're saying about AI is they're saying don't have any rules for 10 years. Well, in 1994-95, they said don't have any guidelines. And they said, well, every medium that we've had in this country has had a couple of things that we need to ask you about. Do you see advertising being on this new medium? And they said, no, that's not our business model. Our business model is subscriptions. And that made sense because I hooked on with my telephone line. It also made sense because if you remember what it looked like, it was all type. It wasn't in color, didn't have sound, and there were no videos. But I saw my kids playing with it, and I went to Procter & Gamble, the largest advertiser in the world, and I said, shouldn't we be looking at this? And a very bright guy said, no. I said, why? He said, because the screen's too small. This screen. We didn't have the iPhone. Didn't have the iPhone for about 12 years. And what Procter & Gamble knew is they knew the television industry was moving towards flat screens and high definition television. And they didn't want me thinking about the internet. They wanted me thinking about how to get more video material into advertising out of radio and print, and to get better at creating videos. So, but I didn't know that then. I just thought it was strange. And then around 2012, after the iPhone didn't happen until 2007, but what really changed things that most Americans didn't, I think, appreciate, because the water changed gradually in the fishbowl, was the development of the like the retweet and the share buttons, because all of a sudden we could target you based on your behavior, not doing research of what your intent might be or what your likes and dislikes might be. We had hard data that said, no, you sent this to somebody. You punched like. You shared it. So we could gear up and go to you with information based on what your interests were. And it revolutionized advertising. It just didn't happen overnight, but it started to happen, and media wasn't bought by people sitting down at a desk anymore. It was bought by computer, by machine learning, and it was paid for by machine learning. And we set up, my industry set up trading desks so that you could go on the trading desk and bid on reaching people. And all this happened, and you didn't see it really. But the other thing that happened was this change from synchronous communication to asynchronous communication. And synchronous communication is face-to-face, where we have all kinds of information, and we're kind of collaborating on understanding, and we're learning from each other. Asynchronous is when we type in text. And the reason why this picture is split like that is it leads to very polarized thinking, because it's sequential. You write a letter to your aunt, you wait 2 weeks, you get a letter back. That's what typing and texting is. You get an email from somebody, you go, what the heck is Bob saying to me? You know, they're not there, you misinterpret what they're saying, and you get mad. And it polarizes people, and they don't really come to a common ground very easily. Because when you type and text things, you use parts of your brain that you don't use when you're conversing. And those ideas become concrete. And what you do is you look for information that will reaffirm those decisions, rather than look for information that might tell you that you were wrong. Because there's too much information out there. You can't handle it all. So you put your stakes into something that you believe is true, and you hold on to it for forever. And it's called commitment consistency. And I began to believe that this is leading us to a new form of brainwashing. And Norm Levy at Procter & Gamble actually helped me with this. He's the first guy I ever met at P&G. He came in to talk to the agencies about advertising that works and doesn't work. And I was really excited that my boss asked me to go. And he said, you're going to come to the meeting and you don't have to say anything because you're too new, but if you want to, go ahead. And this guy's coming in and he's going to talk about advertising. And I thought, wow, this is great. He said, so we want you to write a letter to the guys in the agency, and I'll give you the names of the people, and you'll invite them to the conference room, and you get coffee and stuff for everybody. And Norm will be here next week on Friday, and you'll do the memo, and we want you to take notes during the whole meeting, and afterwards you'll write a report, and that's called a conference report, and that's a very important business instrument, and it'll be part of your learning. I said, okay. Well, by the time I sent the note to all the creatives in the agency, I could realize they weren't thrilled that he was coming. And I couldn't figure out why. But I understand now. You're going to come and tell me how to do advertising? You're going to tell me, a professional advertising person, how to do advertising? And you're going to tell me to do the things that you think work for detergents and toilet paper, and you want me to believe that that's what I should do for Chanel and automobiles? It's just fear. Of course you understand the psychology. So Norm came in, and I observed that he was a little prickly. And I think he knew that these guys weren't thrilled that he was there. And at the end of the meeting, I was enthralled with everything he said. You know, the Duncan Hines fork cut into the sliced cake visual, where you have 10 cakes on the set and you keep them in the refrigerators because you don't want to put them in front of the lights because they'll dry out. And when you put the fork in, it'll crumble instead of being moist. I go, "Ah, this is great. This is why I got into this business." And after he concluded, the room vacated like opening a can of Folgers. They were out. And my boss said, sorry, Norm, I've got to go to another meeting. And here I am with Norm Levy, and I said, Mr. Levy, how did you get this job? I'd really like to have a job like this. And he said, well, I grew up in New York City, and I went to Columbia University, and after I graduated from Columbia, he stopped and he looked at me. He said, I went into the Army, into the Korean War, where I was a U.S. Army intelligence agent. I thought, what's he trying to tell me? I said, what's that? He said, I worked with the prisoners of war who were brainwashed. It didn't occur to me then that he didn't want a lot of people to know about that. You know, he goes from brainwashing to helping Procter & Gamble. He didn't want that. But he was excellent, a student of advertising and a very valuable person at Procter & Gamble. And I was so enthralled by him that I would, when I did start going up to Procter & Gamble, I would stop in and see him. And he wasn't somebody that I had to work with all the time, but I wanted to learn from him. And I have no doubts that Norm Levy said nice things about Tim Love and the Procter & Gamble company, and it helped my career. I didn't do it for that reason. Appreciate it. So when I started this project about what is truth, I thought, I think we're being brainwashed. I went to visit my brother and sister after I retired, and my brother, you know, we grew up in a Republican house in Cleveland, Ohio. I tell people I was a Eisenhower Republican. I had to explain that to the students today. But that was my imprint of what a president was. And I haven't voted for a Republican president since H.W. Bush. I'm just not saying anything, I just wanted you to know. I still consider myself to be a Republican, not like a lot of the Republicans that I see today, but I just wanted you to know that. But I came home and my brother and I were having a conversation in 2013, 14, and he said, you're so far left, I can't even talk to you. What? What are you talking about? Oh, you're just so far left, I can't even talk to you. And it hurt. And then I had a similar conversation with my sister who lives out in Tennessee, and I visited both of them over the next year, and I observed a distinctive thing. In my brother's house, they had Fox News on 24 hours a day. His wife was a nurse working at night, so they had the TV running all day. And I didn't think much of it then, but I started to think that was strange. Sort of, but I saw Fox News in the airports, I saw Fox News in the fitness center, I saw Fox News for a while in the lobby of Procter & Gamble on the television monitor with stock reports. The world was changing. I told AG to get rid of that. I said, that tells people who your God is, and your God isn't the stock market. He took it down. So I realized that I think my brothers, so I said I better look into brainwashing. And brainwashing I found is something that most people, most Americans believe is possible. They've seen the Manchurian Candidate. They tend to think it has something to do with torture. They think that it has something to do with planting a seed that you're not aware of, and later in life at some point it'll go off and you'll be compelled to do some kind of behavior that you're not aware of. And literally, as I've studied brainwashing, that isn't it. And Norm used to give me books to read, and one of the books he gave me to read before he passed away was called Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. And he had me read other things, and I read The Hidden Persuaders, and I read Contagion by Alvin Toffler, and all these other things about how ideas spread. But in Influence, I was reading about it, and there's 7 levers that the author talks about that are common things that we appeal to when we're considering persuasion. Scarcity is one of them. You know, I know you want to buy this car, but if you don't come in on Saturday, a woman's coming in on Monday with cash and she's going to get it. That's scarcity. Here's a 30% off coupon, but it's only good for one day. You better get out and buy toilet paper. We're going to run out of toilet tissue. That's scarcity. So these things aren't Machiavellian, they're just psychological levers that are very common to people. And one of them that the author started talking about near the end of the book was called commitment and consistency. And the author went into how the American POWs were brainwashing during the Korean War. And I called up Norman, I said, is that why you had me read this book? And he said, well, I thought you'd find it interesting. He never wanted to talk about brainwashing. It's sort of like a military guy not wanting to talk about his service. So I didn't press him. But I read about this, and I called him back and I said, what they're saying is that the prisoners would be beaten up every day by 4 people that yelled at them in military garb that didn't speak their language. It was awful. The death rate in captivity in the Vietnam War was 17%. The death rate in captivity in the Korean War was 40%. It was brutal. And what the Chinese did was they would bring somebody in after you've been beaten up 4 days in a row and you don't know what time of day it is and you don't know too cold or too hot and you don't have any food and you haven't seen any other prisoners. You're lonely. And in walks a guy wearing a golf shirt, khaki pants. And he says, I'm not here to beat you up. I just want to talk. Would you like a glass of water? Would you like a cigarette? I just want to see how you're doing and I want to talk. And they might ask the guy, well, we know that you don't like communism and you don't understand Mao Zedong. But you've been in Korea for a while and you've been in Asia. Is there anything that you've seen that you could say communism makes sense for us, but not for you? And the guy might say, well, I know you have famines and people die because there's not enough food. And people back in Iowa have no idea the population here. It's staggering compared to America. And so I guess having some centralized control of the food supply might make sense for you, but not for us. We don't have that problem in Iowa. And the guy'd say, would you mind writing that down? I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to send it to your wife. I'm not sending it to your parents. I just want to be sure that I understand in your words what you're saying. And they'd write it down. And what they were doing was slowly and ever so gently shifting their belief systems. So that by the end of the Korean War, some people in this room will remember this, 21 of the guys decided to stay there instead of coming home. America went crazy. What? They're staying there? And it was because their belief systems had been adjusted. So I decided that brainwashing wasn't an accurate term for what we're experiencing. I've given it a name. I call it neurodystopian conditioning. And the reason is that the information that we're receiving and that we're typing and texting has an effect on our neurology. And we can measure that now with neuroscience. I use the word dystopian because it's dystopian. It twists from reality and creates new realities. And I called it conditioning because it's like fitness. It doesn't happen immediately. It happens gradually over time. You're not aware of it. And in the case of neurodystopian conditioning, nobody's doing it to you. You're doing it to yourself. Because you're going in and you're Googling things that you're interested in, and the computer surveils your interests and starts sending you information that corresponds with your interests. And that's why the medium is a mirror. What you're seeing is a reflection of what your biases are, what your interests are. And the reason why they're doing that is they want to keep you on as long as they can, because then they can sell more advertising. Okay? They did go to advertising. The first thing that went to advertising was another thing most Americans didn't see. Do you remember the classified section of the Sunday paper? Do you ever see it anymore? It's gone. When's the last time you saw Yellow Pages? It all went to the internet, and that is tons of money. All these little shops, all these little law firms, all these little doctor's offices. It's just huge. It's like small donations. It's huge money. So it's about the advertising, and the incentive to the media is to make more money. Because in 1995 and 96, we said, are you going to have advertising? And they said no. And you shouldn't have any restrictions. And they said, no, you shouldn't have any restrictions. And somebody said, well, in every medium we've ever had, there's been child pornography and there's been human trafficking. What are you going to do about that? And they said, well, why don't we have a section 230 in the Communications Act, and it's 26 words, and it exempts the platforms from any responsibility for content. And somebody said, but what about this pornography, and what about this, trafficking? And they said, well, we'll operate on a good faith basis. And I don't blame them, because we allowed them. We told them to just go make money on it. We didn't have any oversight of what they were doing. So this shift from synchronous to typing and texting rewires your brain. Your brain has been rewired. Mine was rewired when I got onto the internet and got overindulgent with it. It's particularly acutely a problem with children whose brains aren't developed yet. And you've been reading more and more about that, and there's some lawsuits going on right now because the platforms could argue that it's not their content, they're just empty pipes. But now they're using their algorithms to curate the content that you're receiving. So they are involved in the content. And AI has been around longer than you think. It came around when we had the like, share, and retweet buttons. But AI is just, it's huge. And we're going through the same thing again, where they don't want to have any restrictions. They don't want to have any guidelines. Now, I was in Singapore in 2008, and the Chinese decided to have the Olympics, and you guys remember this. It was a really big deal. They said, we're going to join the global economy. We're going to come out, and boy, did they put on a show. Remember that? The students said, man, they didn't remember this, so I had to tell them. I also had to tell them that in the Chinese language, they have words that are called homophones, and homophones are words that have double meaning. We have some in the English language, and I should probably remember what they are. But, for example, the number 8 in Mandarin is the most auspiciously lucky number. It's not like 7 or 11. It's like, holy cow, 8? The reason is 8 is pronounced ba, and the pronunciation for wealth and prosperity is ba. Do you hear the difference? No, because they have 7 different tonalities and 300 different dialects. So there's great confusion between 8 and wealth. And boy, if you want to do something, do it in 8. And the most unlucky number is 4. And the reason 4 is unlucky is because it's pronounced su. And the word for death is su. So, I'm not kidding, you don't want to have a dinner party and have 4 people because the other 2 people won't stay. It's bad luck. That's why they have the lazy Susans, and you have more than 4 people at a dinner table. And it's why the Beijing Olympics happened on the 8th day of the 8th month in the year 2008. Ooh. So I think we're unwittingly becoming useful idiots, and the reason is that when the platforms after the Beijing Olympics, a lot of our clients who had not been to China, like Procter & Gamble, I'd had experience launching brands in China with Procter & Gamble, Crest and Head & Shoulders and Pampers and some other things. But around the Olympics, a lot of other American large clients said, we got to go to China. And they did, and we helped them during the Olympics. But the platforms said, we're going to go to China too. And so we want to talk to you at Procter & Gamble about your best practices. Like, who do you talk to in the government? where do you go to get approval for this? Who are what's in the Ministry of Tourism and the Ministry of this and the Commerce Department? Who are the key decision makers, you know? So we shared our best practices with them, and the agency people did too. And they went over and they had these big presentations, Google and Facebook, it was not called Meta then. And they came back and they said, no, we can't come in. Now, American business can be a little arrogant at times. I admit that. And at that time, our people at the platforms weren't losing business because they didn't have business in China. So they said, well, they can't have an internet without us. They can't have a World Wide Web unless they're part of our internet. So we're going to wait them out. In the meantime, we'll go launch in some countries like Indonesia. What most Americans don't know is Indonesia is the third largest Facebook country in the world. Why? Because their population is bigger than ours. And number two, their mean age in Indonesia is 24. It's like America was in the 1960s. Mean age in America now is about 36, 38. So they weren't losing money. They were growing hand over fist and waiting out for China. But China came up with their own internet, and so did Russia, and so did Iran. And the big mistake that we made was we decided to leave our internet open to them. This should really trouble you. But most Americans go, well, I don't know, I haven't seen that. I don't see any Chinese stuff on my internet. They're not making true, but not on my internet. You wouldn't know. It's created by bots. It's created by farms in Russia to send us information, and it's wide open. So you don't know whether it's true or not. And a lot of it's designed to polarize us, because when we're polarized, we can't act, can't do things. We're paralyzed. And that's what I mean about the hidden persuaders. You know about the teen internet addiction. You know, it's been 5 years now, 4 years, 5 years, since the Surgeon General declared that it was harmful to children's mental health. We haven't done anything. And we haven't done anything because the people that run the platforms are making so much money, and they're the biggest lobby in the world. They're bigger than the gun lobby. They're the most dominating lobby in America. And I'm not saying they're bad guys. We set them up to do that. They're doing what we told them to do. And this is a technopoly. This technopoly of the 7 companies that are called the Magnificent Seven, you take them together, they have a market cap that exceeds the second largest economy in the world, China's. Just those 7 companies, my friends. And as they go, so goes our stock market. And more people are on the stock market today than they've ever been, because it came with the internet in 1995. The internet enabled people to go on the stock market themselves. It also enabled people to say maybe we should go to 401k plans instead of profit sharing and other forms of compensation for people. So our stock market and our information systems are more controlled than they've ever been in the history of America. When Hearst bought all the newspapers around the turn of the century, he had not the control that these people do. When 3 networks grew up in the 50s and 60s, it didn't have the control of information that your information is controlled by now. And I think that's a problem in a democratic republic, where it's important that people can come to their own conclusions and have their own ideas. Some people say, well, I don't want government. No government for me. Well, friends, we've had seven guidelines in this country that have operated very, very well for us in communications. And the first one was the Wireless Ship Act in 1910. And the reason was we had ship-to-shore radio, and we were starting to have boats communicating with each other, and the global economy was starting, and we were starting to worry about boats bumping into each other, coming into our harbors or out in the fog. So we had to have some policies that you had to have a radio frequency on a boat, okay? It was in the public interest. It wasn't about the heavy hand of government. It was about security and making sure that our economy and our way of life could persist. And then just 2 years later, we changed it. Does anybody know what happened in 1912? What?
The Titanic thing.
Yeah. The Titanic went down, and they sent a distress signal to Newfoundland, and the distress signal went down the east coast of America, and it didn't move very fast because a lot of ham radio operators had different frequencies, and it interrupted the message flow. And there were fears that we could not operate quickly enough for people in distress. So they changed it and called it the Radio Act. And it had to do with ham radio operators and what frequencies they were allowed to use. Is that the heavy hand of government, or is that in the public interest? I say it's in the public interest. The next thing that happened was we saw that Italy, Germany, and Japan were buying all the radio stations and newspapers in their countries and taking it over by fascism and their governments. And we were afraid that would happen here and that they'd try and buy our radio stations. So we came up with the Radio Act of 1927, which coincidentally is the time that a lot of pretty interesting things happened in the world, besides Babe Ruth hitting 60 home runs. Lindbergh changed everybody's perspective. The world became a much smaller place. So the Radio Act of 1927 set up that if you wanted to run a radio station or you had a ham radio station, you had to have certain things that you would do in order to get the license. You couldn't do it unless you had a license. And some of the things that you had to do is you had to run public service advertising on your radio station for the good of the country. You weren't allowed to run foreign material that hadn't been checked out and for its authenticity and whether it's true or not. And you had to operate in a certain business-like way. Of course, you all heard about Orson Welles and the night that the Martians came to New Jersey in War of the Worlds, and some people were so convinced that this was true that they showed up at Livingston, New Jersey with guns because they wanted to get those Martians. And it was powerful. It was powerful what happened. So going into the Depression, we saw what was happening in the rest of the world. We were not a big leader in the military or anything in the 30s, as you know. And the big powers were the English, the Germans, the Italians, and the Japanese. And we decided that we had better update our communication policy. And the reason was we already knew that television was coming. Check it out, go Google it. They were already messing around with television. And they said, we better codify this idea of licenses. And so they called it the FCC. And that's how you got your license for television and radio. And then at the end of the war, most of the people in the room here will remember that there was the McCarthy era and there was a concern because Russia declared the Iron Curtain, and there was a lot of fear because of the race for the hydrogen bomb and the race for space. And then, you know, we didn't want to, we fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, got to the atom bomb first before Germany did, and before some of the other countries did. But we wanted to be first in space, and in 1956, Russia sent the Sputnik up, and America went, how did they do that? How did this backward country beat us? Well, they're never going to do that again, because we're going to make sure that every technology we have leads the world. And that's why in 1995, when the internet happened, we said we're not going to get it outbeaten. The fairness doctrine was a very simple thing. Most people don't realize what it was. We agreed that with only 3 networks, that it was possible that they could all influence public opinion if they weren't giving a fair perspective of what the news is and events. It was dangerous because they had so much power. So we, the advertisers, like Procter & Gamble's that were putting their money into television, and all the others said, we're going to propose that we agree, we'll shake hands, we're going to have a fairness doctrine. And that means that in our news reporting, it's mandatory that you give both sides of the story. A lot of my fellow people in presentations say to me, hey, what happened to Walter Cronkite? You know, he's the most trusted guy in the world, Tim. And these guys today, well, Walter Cronkite was the most trusted guy in the world because he had to be. He was operating with a fairness doctrine. One of his famous quotes is, the best part of journalism is to tell both sides of the story. He had to. And so did Edward R. Murrow. And this was a wonderful thing. We had some pretty good years between 1949 and 1987. I think you would agree from an economic development standpoint. But in 1987, after CNN was launched, which was cable news, some people who wanted to build more cable stations went to call on the government and said, we don't need the fairness doctrine anymore. Because with cable, you're going to have so many alternatives, you don't have to worry about one dominating the news. So you don't need to do this anymore. The proponents of this argument were Rupert Murdoch and Roger Ailes. Okay? Because it meant they didn't, and maybe they believed that with more variety, we'd find our own news. What we found is with more alternatives, people would hunker down on one thing that they agreed with, that they felt comfortable with. And that became totally influential in people's perspective about what reality was. And that's when the brainwashing started. So then when that was repealed, the next thing that came up was 1996, and you saw what happened there. I'm going to move on. My recommendations are that we treat this as a national security threat, that we focus on kids' safety. The Kids Online Safety Act was passed in Congress, in the Senate, in July 2024, before the election. It was passed 91-3 in the Senate. Does anybody here recall anything passing in our Congress by 91-3 lately? July 2024 also was the time that Elon Musk announced that he was going to put $45 million a month behind Trump. Up until that point, he had not said who he favored. It also was a time when Bezos made some announcements about the Washington Post. It was also a time when Peter Thiel put a lot of money behind a politician in Ohio to become vice president. This powerful information technopoly didn't want any restrictions. They said that they couldn't do it. They said they couldn't have airport hangars full of people watching to see what was on the internet. Well, this can all be done by AI. You know, the stuff that we're seeing from ISIS that comes into our youth in America all has the ISIS flag. AI can pick up visuals like the ISIS flag like that. You don't need people sitting at monitors. But they don't want you to know that because it'll cost them money. And they're afraid they're going to lose advertising. And a lot of the advertising that they're getting is based on fake bot audiences. Okay? So the audience data is inflated. And Procter & Gamble and the other advertisers are kind of caught in the middle of this thing because they got to advertise, but they're worried that they might be paying for a lot of fake stuff. And it's a problem. And if they say anything, the technopoly puts threats on their lives, you know, for imposing any kind of government restrictions. We've become so polarized we don't know what truth is. And finally, the communication policy reform that's needs to happen. We need to insist on it. It should be part of the politician's point of view in this next election. You've heard about the possibility of sunsetting Section 230, and there is some initiatives going on with that with Lindsey Graham and Dick Durbin, and there's hope that in 2 years that something will happen, but they're telling people it's got to change and you got to come up with something else because we can't continue to have this situation where nobody's responsible. It's the only category of product in America that has no product liability, responsibility. The product of internet has no product liability. And I've been holding on to this for a long time because I watched Fox News with my brother and my sister, and I watched very closely what happened during COVID. And the other night I pulled this out and looked at it again, and I said, I don't know, I'm afraid to show this because people will think that I'm, so far left that they can't even talk to me. That's not what this is about. I want you to see the consequence of not having a fairness doctrine.
Tonight, I can report the sky is absolutely falling. We are all doomed. The end is near. The apocalypse is imminent, and you're going to all die. Or at least that's what the media mob would like you to think.
Yeah, I'm dead right on this. The coronavirus is the common cold, folks. The hype of this thing as a pandemic, as the Andromeda strain, as, oh my God, if you get it, you're dead.
This is one of those cases where the more I learn about coronavirus, the less concerned I am. There's a lot of hyperbole.
The national left-wing media playing up fears of the coronavirus.
The sky is falling because we have a few dozen cases of coronavirus on a cruise ship. I am far more concerned with stepping on a used heroin needle than I am getting the coronavirus, but maybe that's just me.
It's a virus, like the flu. All the talk about coronavirus being so much more deadly doesn't reflect reality.
This virus should be compared to the flu because at worst case scenario, it could be the flu.
The far more deadly, more lethal threat right now is not the coronavirus. It's the ordinary old flu. People are dying right now. Nobody has died yet in the United States, as far as we know, from this disease.
That's right.
And the facts are actually pretty reassuring, but you never know it watching all this stuff.
You want to know how I really feel about the coronavirus, Juan? If I get it, I'll beat it. I'm not afraid of the coronavirus, and no one else should be that afraid either.
It is very, very difficult to contract this virus.
It's milder than we thought. The fatality rate is going to drop.
So when you hear the context, it's not quite as scary.
It's actually the safest time to fly. Everyone I know that's flying right now, terminals are pretty much dead. And then the planes, remember back in the day when you had a seat next to you possibly empty, you could stretch out a little more? Yeah. It's like that on every flight now.
One of the things you can do if you're healthy, you and your family, it's a great time to just go out, go to a local restaurant.
Yeah.
Likely you can get in easily.
Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz mocked concerns about the spread of the virus by wearing a gas mask on Capitol Hill.
When a reporter in the Capitol asked Senator James Inhofe of Oklahoma, 85, what precautions he was taking, he extended his arm with confidence. Want to shake hands?
In our line of work, you shake hands. I expect the president will continue to do that. I'll continue to do it.
We have contained this. I won't say airtight, but pretty close to airtight.
It is being contained. And do you not think it's being contained?
0 people in the United States of America have died from the coronavirus. 0.
This is a flu. This is like a flu. It's going to disappear. One day it's like a miracle. It will disappear. I felt it was a pandemic long before it was called a pandemic. I took it very seriously.
By the way, this program has always taken the coronavirus seriously.
Not having a fairness doctrine. Unfortunately, that's not funny because our death rate in America is higher than China's. That's a crime of misinformation. So what all this means is, I'm going to read it from my book, actually. We've created systems powerful enough to shape attention, to influence belief, and to condition your perception. But no constitutional structure can compensate for citizens who no longer govern their own thinking. And that's what this is about, because our thinking is being governed by influence through the material we use and how we communicate. Power no longer needs to seize the state. It only needs to shape the mind. When perception is engineered, consent is manipulated. If we do not reclaim authority over our own thinking, we will not keep this republic. In a democratic republic, the most important thing is the citizens being able to make up their own minds, and to make up their minds with information that they can trust. Doesn't mean they're always right, but we're being played, and we better go back and see what our friend Edward R. Murrow would say about that.
These instruments can teach, they can illuminate, they can even inspire. But they can do so only to the extent that humans are determined to use them to those ends. Otherwise, they're merely wires and lights in a box. There is a great and perhaps decisive battle to be fought against ignorance, intolerance, indifference. It's a fight for the very soul of this republic. And so the question is a very simple one. Not what power unchecked can do. We have seen that answer. No. The question is, what are you prepared to do? The fault, dear Brutus, good night and good luck.
As my mother would say, she'd say, good night and good luck, because you're going to need it. We got to wake up, people. We've got to speak up. What are you going to do? What I'm doing is what I can do. I'm trying to present what I think is happening. I'm not trying to tell you how to think. I'm trying to tell you that how you think isn't how you think you're thinking. And it's dangerous. Thank you very much. Appreciate you being here. Is